This is the story of the very beginning of the Johnson camp on Middle Island in Lake of the Woods. One can certainly argue that the fact that my father, Harry S.B. Johnson, was the son of Swedish immigrant parents was an important factor in our winding up with a cabin on a lake in the Northwoods. Sweden is a lot of lakes and woods, just like you see in this picture, which is taken at Lake of the Woods. And just like most of Minnesota, there were lots of immigrant Swedes that settled in the Northwoods country. My grandparents settled in Chicago, but in the strong Swedish immigrant community. When their only son expressed the desire to go into the ministry of the Augustana Lutheran Church, they were delighted and sacrificed to see that he could. As part of his training, he was assigned an internship in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was there he met my mother Verna, and there where he became enchanted with the idea of a summer cottage. Many Minnesota Swedes had cottages on one lake or another in the land of 10,000 lakes, and in Dad's mind that was the way to go. Up until I was 10, we spent our 2-week summer vacations at a tourist camp on Big Trout Lake near Pine River, Minnesota. It was owned by a Swede, Gust Sequist. Dad would have loved to purchase a cabin lot somewhere up in Minnesota, but the prices were out of his range. But let's go back a bit to establish the sequence of events that led Harry to the shores of Lake of the Woods. After 4 years in the parish ministry in Morrison, Illinois, Dad was called to fill the shoes of his mentor at Augustana College and take over the teaching of Greek to future seminarians. At Augustana, he had a colleague, O. Fritjof Ander, himself a Swedish immigrant. Trying to escape the Midwest hay fever season, Fritjof had ventured ever farther north, eventually winding up in the Kenora area, where he built a cabin on Middle Island. In the summer of 1950, Dad suggested that we spend just 1 week at Big Trout Lake, and during the second, camp at various places, including Kenora, where we would venture out and pay a visit to Fritjof and his wife, Ruth. You can see from the satellite map pictured that the route from Kenora to Middle Island is not straightforward. Fritjof, knowing this, collected us from Kenora and brought us to his camp on Middle, where we remained for 5 days. During this time, Dad was smitten by the beauty of the place, the fishing, and the price of land, $45 per acre. He gave the Department of Lands and Forests $25 down on a couple of acres, exactly where he did not know yet. Before the 5 days were up, he and Mom had selected a site on Middle, about a quarter-mile from Ruth and Fritjof. It was in a protected bay where he tacked markers to trees for the surveyor who would come out during the winter. We had 2 years to construct a suitable recreational dwelling, as they called it. All was ready for the birth of A. Renee the very next summer. The red X on the satellite map of Middle Island marks the spot where A. Renee has emerged. During the ensuing winter, Dad made a scale model of the 16 by 24 cabin he would construct during the summer of 1951. He had never built such a structure before, and the model helped. He cut small 2x4s, siding, and so forth on his Shopsmith, an all-purpose tool. I might add, the Shopsmith is still with us in the shop at A. Renee. The model helped him figure very precisely the lumber necessary for a 16 by 24 foot cabin. Here you see the original invoice for all the building supplies for the original cabin. He wrote ahead, placing an order on June 11th, and paid for it when it was delivered to Matheson Street Dock on June 21st, 1951. The places where he splurged were the 2x6 half-log siding and the Douglas fir flooring. Charlie Bergman, the owner of Bergman Lumber, was a member of the Augustana Swedish Lutheran Church in Kenora, hence the 10% discount. There we are, June 21st, 1951, Lois's 7th birthday. All of the lumber for the cabin is on the barge, along with tools and camping equipment. The invoice you saw lists $6 for the barge. I don't think that included the Muckwa and its owner-operator Ernie Lindstrom, but I doubt if he charged very much. As an aside, Muckwa is long gone, but Ernie died only very recently at over 100 years of age. I wonder what was going through Verna's head in this picture. She could not swim and was actually afraid of water, and here she was headed out for an extended stay on an island. Here you see most of the 300 feet of A. Renee shoreline.
You can see the lumber piled just up from the shore. The spot was chosen for its harbor and the stand of red pine trees to the right. This was raw bush. Any needed paths and camping spots had to be hacked out of the bush. My first activity was to run up and chop down a small poplar with my new hatchet. My cut was about 2 feet above the ground, and I was quickly taught to cut as close to the ground as possible. The Anders cabin was a 1/4 mile through the bush and 3/4 of a mile by boat around the peninsula. Although I don't remember the specifics, I am sure our first meal was one prepared by Ruth Ander on her wood cook stove. It was all we could do to get camp set up. Here you see our camp. The 12 by 12 wall tent was actually sewn by Grandma Johnson and the poles and ropes crafted by Grandpa J. They had used the tent on vacation trips to southern Wisconsin. It had no floor, so Dad used shiplap boards intended for the roof for a floor. The green umbrella tent was for storage. He also used poplar poles and shiplap to construct work tables and benches. Mom cooked on a Coleman camp stove on such a table underneath a large spruce tree. Believe it or not, that galvanized metal bushel basket is still part of A. Rene. It has large holes in its bottom, but can be used for hauling leaves and so forth. Lois and I slept on armory cots, and Harry and Berna on an old mattress right on the wood floor. Every camp needs a latrine. Dad constructed a 2-hole outbench, as we'll call it, and you see Lois and I making use of it. Berna is posing with the clotheslines on an open area we call the flat. The soil is very thin, and we have mowed continually, so it is still the flat. That poplar stump you see on the bottom right might just be the stump of my first tree. Here's the cabin under construction. The photographer is standing near the shore looking inland. Under Lois's feet you can see one of the 12 cement piers Dad constructed for a foundation. He would dig down to solid rock anywhere from 1 inch to 2 feet, construct a form from shiplap, and then gather sand, pebbles, and small rocks from the beach area, which he mixed with cement. The mixture, when wetted, went in the forms where it quickly solidified, forming a very solid, durable foundation. Next, there were 3 rows of 6 by 6 beams running the 24-foot length on the piers. Next came 2 by 6 joists spaced 2 feet apart. He put the fir flooring directly on the joists, no subfloor, and it's a summer cabin, you know. At this point, Fritjof organized a building bee. Several neighbors came, and they raised the stud walls and rafters in 1 day's work. That really makes it look like a building. The women cooked a meal, and Mrs. Maisie provided cold beer. By this time, our little dog Tuffer had joined the family. You can barely see me holding her. Lois and I took turns holding her in photos and probably fought over who got to go first. You can see that there's still a lot of lumber to nail together at this point. This shot is taken at about the same stage of development, only here we're looking from the back down towards the lake. The bush was much thicker then. Now the lake would be visible. Lois's turn. The floor was covered with tar paper to protect it from the frequent overnight rains. The days were sunny, but rain came overnight. That's a good shot of our camp in the background. You can see more clearly the table Mom cooked on. The little dog slept in a butter box in the tent until she got cold, at which point she would jump out and curl up on Berna's feet. Not a good idea. My turn for the dog. Notice the tent is now on the floor of the new cabin. The reason for this is that the boards on the floor of the tent were needed to complete the roof. That roof marks a milestone for me. It was the first part of the construction that was straightforward enough that I could actually help by pounding in some nails. I was 11 after all. You might notice that the roof is essentially eaveless. Dad in the beginning was unsure how to cut rafters to make eaves, but used 2x8s for plates to make very small overhangs. If you look closely between the branches of the willow in the foreground, you will see the Coleman stove that Mom cooked on. Here the half-log siding is going up. You can see that there's a lot more to go. That type of siding was sturdier than the typical drop siding which others used, and which we also used in later buildings. Dad had been very impressed with the cabins of Gus Sequist, which used half-log siding. There was a second building bee organized in which the men worked on siding.
Though they worked just as hard during the first bee, the progress was not as dramatic. It takes longer to put on siding than to frame walls and roof. Mitering the corners proved quite tricky. The home miter boxes Dad built were not very satisfactory. To this day, if you examine the corners, you will see gaps filled with caulking. The long galvanized nails used to secure the walls were tricky to pound, so I couldn't help much with that. I remember that I perfected my skill as a gopher.
The cabin is really taking shape here. The roofing is rolled roofing. Dad was afraid that the storms of the north would blow shingles off. I got to help with nailing the rolls onto the roof. We were definitely on the front side of the learning curve with that roof, as it leaked in several places. Those cleats you see were necessary, but we had to put holes in the paper to secure them.
Well, Lois has the dog. Here the windows, which were ordinary barn sash, and the door were in. The tent is no longer necessary. Notice that the gable ends have vertical siding. This is somewhat unusual, but worked well in Dad's design. The cabin looks good and solid, and it was. There was always time for swimming, which we did down at the beach. Neither Lois or I could really swim at this stage. The boat is our first, which I have described in more detail in another show. The dog was a much better swimmer than any of us in the picture. So here is the A. Rene shoreline again. But this time there's a cabin shining through the trees. It is no longer completely raw bush. We have started to tame it a bit. Here you see the cabin pretty much the way we left it in August of 1951, minus a good deal of the junk. We still had to remove the cleats from the roof. You see a stovepipe which vented a wood cook stove purchased towards the end of our stay that summer. That meant that the Coleman could be semi-retired. The box we used for a step up to the door was a fish box, the kind commercial fishermen use to transport their catch to market. Lois and I are wearing the life preservers we were required to wear whenever we ventured anywhere near the water. Dad had worked very hard that summer, but he had his dreamed-for cabin. The name A. Rene he devised the following winter, I believe. To him it was a place of peace where you are reborn. I am not sure it means exactly that to all of us, but it has been an important place for the Johnson family and friends who have spent time there. I can remember being ready to go home when a time came in August of 1951, but I also remember that that was the last time I have ever been ready to leave.